and talk about. So just outside of myself and Ben, I thought it would be a great idea to bring more people into this forum as kind of the experts in the field on this. So we do have some members from both the U of M and from Parks and Trails. So we have a few of those guests here with us today to talk about some of the opportunities that are available to us for visitor counts, some contacts that we can use when we're looking at doing our visitor counts. And then we'll open it up to our discussion to kind of see around the state who's been doing what for visitor counts, how people are kind of getting some of that information, and continue to talk about the importance of why we should be doing our visitor counts as much as we can in the parks. I know myself, I could certainly do a lot better at some of the visitor counts, but we struggle with kind of how to do that in our parks because of our setup. And now I just realized that I totally forgot to introduce who I am. Sorry about that. I am Carlin Zigler. I'm the Parks Director for Olmsted County Parks in Southeast Minnesota near Rochester. And I also sit on the board for Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails, and I'm the communications chair for Greater Minnesota. So I'm the one that you see putting together all of these forums, and it's been a really great addition to have these forums and be using this technology to really reach out and connect all of us throughout the state. So I'm pretty excited about how it's been going the last year. One of the pluses and bonuses to COVID is this type of setup. So it's been really great. So at this point, I am going to just kind of give our experts in the field some time to tell us a little bit more about some of the options and visitor counts that they are seeing. So I'm going to start it off with Bridget and Artie and let you introduce yourselves and what you've done with some of the parks and trails throughout the state and some of the things that you do for us.
Hey, all right. Thanks, Carlin. So I did have a PowerPoint, but you know what, given that we have 10 minutes and I know hearing what you're saying in this introduction, I think I'm going to throw that out and we're just going to kind of talk today. So I hope that's okay. My name is Bridget Tuck and I work for the University of Minnesota Extension. So I work statewide with communities really focused on helping them understand their economies and how their economies work. And in that, I have a partner in crime, if you will, Shini. She's here on the call today too. And Shini is currently the interim director of the Tourism Center. So we do a lot of work at the intersection of economics and tourism. And in that work, we've worked with clients across the state of Minnesota, everywhere from looking at the economic impact of Vikings training camp to Grandma's Marathon to classic car roll-ins, and getting to partner with Artie on a couple of projects. We did one on the Wasabi Bike Trail as well as the curling club that is located in Eveleth. Right, Artie? I got the right city.
You got it, yes.
So Artie and I have worked a lot together and actually really have a good time. If you can't tell, we enjoy our partnership. So in the center for, in this work that Shini and I have done across the state, we typically, what we do is we do a visitor profile. So we do some kind of intercept survey where we're stopping people. And this is where Artie was so valuable with the Wasabi Trail to kind of intercept people as they were enjoying their biking experience and have them fill out a survey to kind of understand who they are, their demographic profile, why they might be on the trail, what other activities might they enjoy while they're in the community, kind of getting at that piece of it. And then we've always had to do some counting. So our counting systems maybe aren't the best, but we can talk about a couple of different approaches. One approach really is to do that kind of like Artie does. Artie has trail counters that is like and Artie, I'm going to have you jump in here and talk a little bit about your trail counters and how those work.
Sure. And just real quick, my name is Artie Nurmi Wilberg. I'm the executive director of Club Wasabi, and we are the Friends of the Wasabi Trail. Some of you might be familiar with Bob Mansling, who's the director of the Regional Rail Authority, who owns the Wasabi Trail. And when Carlin put a little inquiry out about talking about visitor studies and counts, she knew that we had done something with the trail. She asked Bob. Bob asked me. I asked Bridget, because she's the real expert, So I'm only here today to give you some insights on how wonderful it was to work with the tourism center at the university, and Bridget and I have just become really good friends after doing 2 studies together. So anyway, in talking about counters on the Wasabi Trail, we do have laser counters out on the trail, interspersed. Not, if you're not familiar with the Wasabi Trail, paved asphalt trail stretching from Grand Rapids to Ely. Right now, we've got 135 miles complete. When done, it's going to be 155, 160, right around there. So we've got counters out there, and our trail is so long, and you can get on literally in dozens of different locations to get a really accurate count. It's not really a user count. It's more of giving us an idea of trends, where the heavy traffic areas are, where people are using the trail more heavily. We can use that as far as maintenance scheduling and watching for trends. And, so that's pretty much all our counters are able to do for us. And Bridget and I did try and use those numbers in doing our visitor study. And it's very difficult. You got people are traveling out and back multiple times. But we do have a history over many years of those counters, and we can gradually, having kept them in the same places all the time, we can see the growth from 150,000, all the way up to 250,000 this past year. So again, it's just showing us trends.
Yeah, and so I think that's where that visitor profile really came into play. So already had her counts from her different, and you've got like maybe 10 or 15 of them along the trail, or maybe more than that. I can't remember.
Yeah, I'd have to look to tell you for sure, but I think it's only about 7 or 8, something like that.
Okay, so we got that trail count data from Artie, and then we were smart in the way that we asked the questions on that visitor intercept survey to start to understand what were people's trail usage. So we could look at that and say, okay, of all the people who said they used the trail or were on the trail, X% were out and back. So then we were able to take Artie's total count and kind of bring that down to say, okay, 50% of those are out and back. So we're going to bring it down by half because we know we've counted them all twice. And we were just really able to use some of those survey questions to start to be able to get those counts a little more accurate and a little more refined and kind of balance those out a little bit. So that is a challenge. Physical counters are out there. And Artie, I know you also shared with me that like someone cut down the tree that the counter was on. So.
Right. We lost one year. Yeah.
So, but we do also, I want to, because this is kind of about resource sharing as well. We do have a colleague at the University of Minnesota. He's over in the Humphrey School, but he's specifically focused more a little bit on bicycling, but he has a very deep knowledge of trail counting and the physical kind of methods. So if this is a conversation that you want to keep moving forward, he would definitely be a person to loop in. We kind of talked about that internally, but we realized we only had a week and we didn't know if that was enough time for him. So there are resources at the U and more people with expertise in that area. Another method that we can use for counting trail users is to do more of a sampling method. So Shinny and I use this a lot when we're working with more festivals and events. Particularly, we've done a couple county fair studies, and where we just try to get a sense of how many people are using the trail at a certain time, and then use that to extrapolate out. So this works particularly well, especially if you have a trail that maybe has only a couple entrances. Artie's trail with all the different ways in and out might be really difficult, but you can station people along the trail at times to do some counts to just get a sense of how many people are using it. You have to be very careful that you do a good sample so that you're not just counting, Saturday morning at your most busy time and over sort of representing, but look at different days of the week, different times, different seasons as well to start to kind of get an estimate for how many people are using it. And again, if you did some kind of visitor profile, that would allow you to be able to kind of refine and kind of hone in on what that trail count might be. And then there's kind of now more and more technology is out there as well. We've been kind of looking at this a lot. Mobilytics. So, everybody carries a cell phone in their pocket these days, and you're going out on the trail, you're going to bring that with you. And so there are now data sources out there where companies collect all that data. Every time your cell phone pings the location to the Weather Channel, it's saying where you are. So there are these data sets that can hone in on like, what is the home location of a phone? So it knows every night it goes to, I live in Leesure, it goes to my little home address here. And then you can look at where has that cell phone traveled. So that might be kind of evolving into one of the better ways to do counts, because you would be able to count, how many cell phones were on a trail during a particular time and day. I think the kind of drawback right now is that it's less accurate, we're finding, in less dense places. So if you wanted to look at how many people come to the Mall of America and you drew your little triangle around the Mall of America and looked at where did all those phones come from, there's enough foot traffic there that you get really good solid data. And so on some of their bigger parks, some of your more commonly used trails, that might be useful. For some of your less traveled, it may not be as good of a source for counting visitors. But the additional thing that comes along with that is a lot of rich detail, right? So you can say, hey, I know if I looked at, XYZ trail, I can see where the zip codes for all the people that came to that trail, where their home zip code is. So now you not only get some counts, but you also get sort of a sense of who they are and where they're coming from. And you can kind of put that back into some profiles about demographics and stuff based on that information. So those are a couple of approaches we've been looking at. I will stop talking and turn it over to the other panelists, and then we can answer questions at the end, you think, Carlin? Or okay. Artie, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add.
Nope, sounds good to me. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Bridget. Yeah, we'll get to some questions overall at the end, but we'll move it over to Andrew now. From the Parks and Trails Council. Thanks for coming, Andrew.
Yeah, hi everyone. Again, yeah, thanks for having me. Great to be here. Trail counts I'm kind of a nerd, so they're one of my favorite things to talk about. So it's great to be here and have the invitation. Just kind of quickly an introduction of who I am, who the Parks and Trails Council is. We're a nonprofit, kind of independent charitable organization. So we don't own or manage any trails across Minnesota, but work closely with all types of public partners. The DNR is a huge partner of ours, and more so in the last couple of years, kind of the regional trails, regional partners, counties and cities have become more and more important partners as well. We were founded back in the 1950s, kind of have long had a very strong focus on land acquisition, and also have had a lot of advocacy presence at the Capitol for many years now. More recently, we've done a lot more work with assisting kind of volunteer efforts and friends groups across the state of Minnesota. And really for a long time, we kind of have always had this kind of principle and belief that everything we do should be guided by the best available science and data. And so kind of out of that principle, that belief, we've really kind of, our own research program has kind of sprouted from that in the last 5 to 10 years. It's been a slow process, a slow development, but we're trying to do more and more in this area. And that's really what my role at Parks and Trails Council is. And one of the main initiatives that we've done within our research program is trail counting. So, as we kind of developed this one to kind of just assist and consult with all the great work that the universities and the public agencies are already doing, but also then to see like what gaps might exist in which we could help and fill in some of those. And most of you on this call probably know better than I that for a long time, kind of park visitor counts have been a little bit more standardized. There's usually 1 or 2 entrances to a park. It's kind of an easier thing. Trails have always been kind of a whole different animal. And it's already been referenced, right, by Artie and Bridget that, there's multiple trailheads, there's all kinds of road junctions, there's backyards, there's people can kind of jump onto these things wherever. And so it's always been a much more difficult problem to solve. And so that's kind of one of the main areas that we started to look. And so back in 2015 was the first year that we kind of dove into this work. And we did it kind of as simplistically as you could, right? We got a bunch of volunteers across the state of Minnesota. We kind of gave them random times to go and just sit on a lawn chair along a trail. This was the state trail system, and then they just made tally marks every time someone passed. From that, there's some extrapolation factors that have been developed over the years that are both kind of national, and then Greg Lindsay, who Bridget mentioned over at the Humphrey School, has done a lot of this work in Minnesota. So working with those experts, then we kind of introduced our first kind of state trail count back in 2015. These are broad numbers, right? So we're like, when you do this, we're on the trail for maybe 2 to 10 hours. very small section of time. But with that, you can kind of get an order of magnitude type level, right? And so you kind of know if like 10,000 people are using the trail or 50 or 100, you kind of get these broad kind of ballpark figures. And actually, I was just looking at it this morning, as looking back at those initial numbers we did, I mean, some of them do vary quite a bit from what data we've been able to collect since then, but a lot of them are actually pretty close. And it's kind of the most basic way to do a trail count, but if it's all you can do, it's a great starting point, and it kind of gives you an idea. I wouldn't use that type of work to do kind of changes or trends over time. I think there's just too much variability, but you know, if you're just getting started in this area and you've got a staff person or a volunteer who can sit on the trail for a couple hours, you can get some pretty decent bench time numbers. Anyway, since then, knowing those limitations, we have branched out, and the entirety of our trail count program is now centered around automated trail counters. So we have a set of 4 different automated trail counters. We use, we use EcoVisio as our equipment manufacturer. They're one of the leaders in the field, but there are some other types of counters to use. And they're a combination. They use an infrared sensor and kind of pneumatic tubes to get a sense of number of bicyclists and then number of pedestrians using any one location. And so rather than just focusing on any one trail, we've kind of seen our role as helping smaller entities, oftentimes, though not always, kind of start to do some temporary short duration counts to get a sense of who's using their, or what numbers are using their trail system. And we kind of have moved the program around from year to year. So the very first year, we helped the DNR focus on 3 different state trails. We were on the Paul Bunyan Trail and the Gateway and Browns Creek Trail in St. Paul and Stillwater, and then the Root River and Preston Harmony Trail down in southeast Minnesota. So that was in 2017, we did that project. And then since then, DNR kind of used that as a launching pad, and they now have their own trail counting system for their entire kind of 600-mile system. And so we've really been helping local entities since then. So in 2018, we did a big project for the Cannon Valley Trail, Cannon Falls to Red Wing. 2019, we did a big project for Chicago County on 2 of their regional trails. 2019, we also did a much smaller project for Mille Lacs County on the Sioux Line Trail. And then since then, you know, so those were all kind of paved bicycle systems. We've tried to branch out. And so in the last couple of years, we've done some mountain biking projects at Tioga Recreation Area near Grand Rapids. We've supplemented some DNR counts at Cuyuna. And then this past winter, we're wrapping up a project in which we've been looking at cross-country skiing at Great River Bluffs State Park down by Winona. One of the other areas I'll mention quickly is we've started to look at places to do some natural kind of experiment, so to speak. So one of the questions that has been on our mind is how trail conditions and kind of trail rehab affect use. And so a couple of years ago, we did some preliminary counts along the Secaucus State Trail, which for years has been notorious for having really, really miserable, rough pavement. Since then, that has been repaved. And so we did some before counts and with some control locations, and we'll be looking to go back in the next year or 2 to do some afterward counts to see how that trail condition has affected kind of the trends there. And we're looking to do some similar type of before and after experiments at some trails here in the Twin Cities. That's a quick rundown of kind of some of the things we've done. We can certainly dive more into some of our methods if people are interested. But yeah, I mean, to date, we've really focused all of our attention in the trail counting area on or visitor counts on trails. And so I don't have as much experience with the park users side of things.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm going to start off. A lot of the focus is on trails, but I'm assuming a lot of these methods can go for parks in general, especially if you have 1 or 2 access points to the park. I know Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails did the sampling method, kind of put out a statewide program. I think it was around that 2014 or 15 time period, maybe a little bit earlier than that. And that was that random sampling at random times of the day. But is there a standard way to import that data into a number? I mean, how do you take that information and get it into your equation to figure out the visitor counts at that point? Is that something that's a standard that's out there for people to see?
Yeah, I can try to speak to that quickly. So one of the things that I've had to wrap my head around as I've gotten into trail counts is, generally I think the sense in the recreation world is the focus has been on like number of users, unique kind of visitors. As we started doing trail counts and seeing that a lot of the work in that area was really coming out of the transportation sector, they're much more focused on just traffic volumes. So it's not number of like unique cars. It's like the number of cars that pass a given point. And from my experience, at least with trail counts, that's really been the method that has taken over kind of the trail counting world. And Minnesota seems to be going more and more in that direction for the most part. And so kind of how that is done, so there's currently for kind of off-road trail facilities, there's about 15, I guess even more, but there's at least 15 kind of permanently installed trail counters that are maintained mostly by the Minnesota Department of Transportation, but the DNR has them as well. So these are counting people every hour, every day of the year. And so from that sense, we have a pretty good idea. This is kind of a really quick way to explain how it works but we have a good idea kind of for any week, for any day in a given year, kind of how much of the trail traffic happens on that day or that week. And so what researchers have really kind of ingeniously figured out is that you can, by taking a short duration count for kind of a 1 week period is kind of ideal, or even longer, at any location, there's an assumption that the traffic there will vary similarly to how traffic is at other nearby points, or kind of the statewide index. And so with a short duration count, you can extrapolate that then to kind of an overall seasonal estimate. And that kind of gives you kind of a good look at kind of monthly traffic, your average daily traffic, your average weekly traffic. And so kind of the basic numbers you get from that extrapolation method, which is pretty, it's MnDOT uses it, DNR uses it. It's used by a lot of people across Minnesota and nationally. You kind of get kind of an overall traffic number, kind of an ADT, average daily traffic. And then you can get a breakdown of bicyclists versus pedestrians, and then kind of traffic hourly patterns. So like peak uses at noon or 4 o'clock or whatever. If you have counters across a system, then you can estimate kind of miles traveled. So if you have kind of a counter every mile, or every 3 miles, or every 5 miles, you can kind of then estimate kind of total miles that are traveled across the system. And if you are interested in that unique or kind of number of visits number, then you would need some type of survey instrument that would talk about average miles of travel per visit, and you can make that calculation. So that's probably a little bit too much detail. I apologize if anyone's eyes glazed over. So kind of, yeah, the baseline statistic is kind of a traffic number that then with supplemental information, you can translate over to a visitor number. For parks, my understanding is typically you're looking at number of vehicles that are entering and then having some type of multiplier effect based upon like average people per car. So it's a little bit of a different calculation there.
Yeah, and I just wanted to follow up. Oh, were you going to say something, Artie?
Yeah, I was going to ask if you had anything to add.
Okay. Well, I just would add that in our work, we a lot of times are focusing on economic impact. So we're trying to figure out, what is the economic impact of the trail or the park. And so for that, we do need to take that extra step down and refine to really how many unique users are there, right? Because we want to know, we're going to assign a spending figure to them, and then we kind of need to know how many they are. I would say too that one thing, I serve on my county parks board. My parks director is on here. He's awesome. But one thing that he really does well, I think, is provide us with a report every year on the campgrounds. So campgrounds are maybe another subset where because people register to use our campground, we get some really good information around who's in the campground, where they're coming from, some of that information as well. That, again, that's a subset of all of this, but it's not one to overlook either.
So I can just talk about the counters on the Wasabi Trail. So keep in mind, this is secondhand information. As the Friends organization, we're not in charge of the counters. The Wasabi Trail actually does that. But in talking to our executive director, Bob Mansling, the determination they came up with was that our average cyclist travels about 15 miles in a trip, and the average walker is 1 to 2 miles. So that's how they determined where they placed the counters. And Bridget, you're right, we have like 11 out there. I pulled up my data. So we've got 11 counters out there. So that's kind of how they decided how to place things. And I can also, just a little bit about that gathering data. We're very fortunate on the Wasabi Trail. You have to purchase a wheel pass to ride the trail. So we're able to harvest a lot of information from our users as far as addresses and emails and, you know, where they're coming from. I put all of those, our annual users, into a database, and as a result, I can do a bulk mailing. I just sent one out, you know, like, hey, the trail's open, here's when the bike tour is, all that kind of good stuff too. So we're lucky to be able to harvest data there. And actually we use those wheel passes in our surveys. I send a bunch of emails to Bridget, and not only did we do paper intercept surveys on the trail, but we also did email surveys to some of those users. And that worked out almost better than the paper surveys, I think. So.
I know in a personal experience, again, from that original sampling method that we did, it kind of blew our minds how many more visitors we maybe had than what we had. We had, our estimations of our visitor counts were super low. So after that, we started doing the road counters because we had controlled access. So we knew, you know, every car that goes in has to go out, kind of an access to our nature center area. And that really actually helped confirm the fact that, yes, indeed, we do have that many visitors, and we've done them every 2 years or 4 years. It's depending on the year. In a seasonal summer, we can see the increase in numbers in our parks. There again, with the road counters, there's another option of people you can reach out to in your parks or trails is your MnDOT or your highway department, to see if you can just borrow some of their road counters for the year. And that's what we've done quite a few times over the last summer. But there again, I go back to, okay, is there a standard number of people per car that are using across the state? Because I've seen anywhere from 2.5 people per car to 3.8 people per car. And, we're trying to factor in the fact that we've got buses coming in and out too. So we go a little bit on the higher side. Right or wrong, I guess we've been using 3.4 people per car, just because we know that we see a whole lot more families than we do couples or single people, as well as the buses that we have. So I'm curious to throw it out there and see, if you've been doing road counters, what are some of the numbers that you're using as your multipliers? Or is there an actual standard out there that you should be using?
Well, I can jump in. This is Ben with Stearns County. So ours is kind of a little obscure. So at Quarry Park and Nature Preserve, we have people out there from Memorial Day to Labor Day, and they see anywhere from 4 to 8 people in a vehicle. So we use a number of 3.5 for Quarry Park. Now at the rest of our parks, based off of what our maintenance guys see out and about, we use a number of 2.5 per car, just because we don't tend to see as many large families or 6 teams packed into a 5-passenger car coming in to go swimming at Quarry Park. So those are the numbers that we use within our system, and it's just based off of, I guess, an educated number based off of what we see or what we believe we see out. So.
Right, and I figured it would be hard to get that standard number because, yeah, your parks or your trails are different in what they're pulling in for visitors. Anybody else have some number counting like that they do like that?
I don't know, Andrew, if you have any number, but that would be where we would recommend probably doing a survey, right? And it wouldn't necessarily, we in Extension as university, we like our number to be statistically valid, right? So we want to collect a lot of, as Artie knows, we like to collect a lot of surveys. However, I mean, I think just like when you put the counters out and you realized, oh, we've been undercounting. I think if you looked at some way to just try to capture a sense of, pick Saturday and pick a Tuesday or something and try to just kind of do a little bit more robust data collection. And I've even seen you mentioned a nature center at our county park. They just simply put up a little easel in the entryway, and they were trying to collect where people were coming from. So there's a little red dot, you could put on your city. But even something like that, where people, as they come through, if there's a place they're passing, if you could even just put up a sign, how many people in your party today? And they put a little dot next to their number, just so you can start to get and really be able to kind of collect some information specific to your park. There's some creative ways, I think, to do that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the park visitors is a little bit outside of kind of my expertise, certainly. But I think as Ben alluded to, and Bridget kind of seconded on, I think, yeah, as far as the standard, I'm not aware of anything that exists, and I'm not sure if like one would even be applicable. I think park facilities vary so widely that the type of visitors per vehicle is also going to vary, and so that certainly is an area where surveys would be a really important piece. I guess I'll mention, and I guess I hesitate to say this, but I like precise guy, right? Like my friends will tell you that I have a spreadsheet for everything. But I also have to remind I don't think we can always let the perfection become the enemy of the good, or so to speak. And with limitations and drawbacks and probabilities are just inherent to everything we're going to do in research. And so for starters, for kind of a standard extrapolation factor, one of the key things that we're probably looking for there is trends. And so long as that factor is consistent from year to year, at least until there's good reason to change it, that's going to be valuable information, right? And so I guess I would just say, as we think about all of these things, I mean, data is really easy to misuse, but a little bit of data is almost always better than no data. And certainly then, once you start collecting data, you start to learn what those limitations are. So long as we're open and clear about what they are, and kind of, this is what we know, but this is why what we know might be wrong. And as soon as you start that process, you can refine and improve from year to year. And so I guess I'm trying to say that with all these unknowns, it's the key thing is not to let it get in the way of starting and doing something.
Yeah, and I'll just follow up with that, Andrew. I think you're spot on in the sense, I present a lot of my results to community groups, and really being transparent. I mean, just saying, this is the number we use, 3.8, and here's why we use 3.8. That already takes you leap years forward, because people can kind of understand in their own head, well, maybe I don't think 3.8 is the number. I can kind of do some calculations on my own to get at what I feel like is a number. The other thing that we like to call, economists like fancy words, so we call it sensitivity analysis. But basically, change a couple of your underlying assumptions. The next time you're doing your numbers, change it from 3.8 to 3.2, and just see how the results change, right? And then you'll get a sense of how much does that assumption really change my outcome. And you might find it doesn't really change the outcome a whole lot. And so then it's okay that that you've got a little bit of error in there. But it's also just kind of nice to have in your own head that, like, here's the number we're going to go out and talk in the public about, but I know that maybe I'm in this range, right? And that gives you, and I'm guessing, Andrew, you do a little bit of that range kind of work too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, probably a lot of you probably have more experiences with this than I, but it's always fascinating to see how people in the public in particular react to numbers and to research, right? And there's, depending, everyone has whatever biases and preconceived ideas that will impact whether or not they think what you did is valid. And, I've had some studies where, like, I know that there's a lot of limitations and that there's all kinds of drawbacks, and then, people will love it and they think it's the greatest thing. And then I've had other times where it's, I'm really kind of confident with what I've done, and that I think there's pretty small limitations, and people are like, well, wait a minute, like, what about A, B, and C? And so, I guess it again just speaks to there's limitations, abound, and to be upfront, as Bridget mentioned, and just to remember that that no matter what we put out there, there's going to be admittedly a healthy dialogue and back and forth about what it means and how valuable it is.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I think want to open it up to some of the suggestions or things that you've tried in your own parks and areas. But I think we're realizing that, and Renee popped on here from Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails Commission, and, she's really trying to help us push the visitor counts too, because it's so important for us now to make our story to the visitors, to your commissioners, to the politicians, and to your grant sources. Having those visitor counts can really, really help boost what your message is for your particular area. So I think Renee could talk just a little bit more about that. If you're willing to, Renee, otherwise, then we can move on and see what everybody else's experiences are or questions that you might have towards visitor counts.
Thanks, Carlin. Sorry I'm late. I had another meeting that, we all are this time of year, kind of passing meetings in the middle of meetings. I'm just glad, and I thank Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails for having this discussion, because as Carlin said, trying to get a handle on where the numbers are is really, if I could wave a magic wand and we could all come up with a basis for counting, and even more important, do that, I would do it yesterday. Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission, there are 64 designated facilities, parks and trails within Greater Minnesota's system. And the largest majority aren't doing counting. Understandable, no one's charging admission for the most part, so that's not as important. But we do get the question on a regular basis from legislators, as you would imagine. So where are your numbers compared to DNR and the Metropolitan Council? Well, they're there. Gee, we have a lot of great anecdotal information. How we can tell you about all kinds of parks that were super busy. But as far as how many that translated to and heads through the door, I couldn't begin to tell you. So there is an initiative that's being started amongst the three agencies, DNR, Met Council, and Greater Minnesota, who are all recipients of the Parks and Trails Legacy Fund, to hire a researcher that will be based at Metropolitan Council, but work with streetlight data. So we'll have numbers for each of the parks in all three of our districts, but so that's a great start for us. That gives us something to work with. This summer, we're also hoping to do a count of 3 of our mountain bike trail systems in Greater Minnesota in the northern part. Detroit Mountain as an example of one type of a system. Duluth Traverse, 100-mile long mountain bike trail system that runs through the city, and then Cook County mountain bike trails. Again, a different flavor for all 3 systems to give us more to base. So that gives us a baseline when we get the streetlight data, right? So we can see at least where the visitor counts are, and we're also doing an intercept survey with that. So it's the crux for all of us as to how we come up with those numbers, but I think it really behooves us to do that so that when the reauthorization for legacy comes up in a short, 17 years, we can all say, all systems, this is how many people used our systems, because it isn't across the board that every legislator thinks legacy is the be all and end all. There's not a session I sit in where someone doesn't say, this is a waste of taxpayer dollars. All 4 of these huge important funds, well, they may feel that way about those taxpayer dollars, but all of us voted in favor, I'm guessing, of those, that self-tax that we imposed upon ourselves to better our water quality and better our outdoor heritage and better arts and culture and parks and trails. So it's, I can't add much today other than I so encourage everyone to try this. And for the parks and trails in our system, we'll get some numbers, and we're also committed to working through these next few years to have on the ground surveys, do actual surveys within the parks that Greater Minnesota will pay for, because that's funds we've got set aside for some research. So it's something we hope to augment as we move forward. But thanks for hosting this forum today. And I'm sorry I missed the first part of it, but I'm so excited to hear this talk about figuring out how we come up with some sort of shared accountability.
This is Xing Qian from the University of Minnesota Tourism Center. Thank you, Renee. And
Nice to see you again.
yes, nice to see you too. And familiar faces, of course, my partner in crime, Bridget, and Andrew and Artie. So it is very, very encouraging to hear that DNR, Met Council, and Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails Commission are coming together to use the streetlight data. I'm not here to advocate for any particular commercial entity, knowing that Streetlight is a commercial company. My point is, it is important to collaborate and cooperate with each other. I know that Met Council has already previously purchased so-called big data or mobile data from a commercial vendor to do user accounts for its regional parks in the metro area previously. So at least one entity has already had some experiences using this type of big data. And in the past couple of years, there has been research that that compared different data sources in terms of their accuracy and reliability. So I think now we have a variety of resources and sources for us to make a more informed estimate. And DNR has its own, systems and resources and past experiences. And I would also add that the Minnesota Department of Transportation has also used mobile data from a commercial vendor to do traffic counts and other related work. And so, all public agencies or nonprofit agencies, so it would be very healthy to have discussions and dialogues among these entities to really gauge, find out the most effective and efficient way to use these big data opportunities. And I know that the Met Council, I'm pretty sure it was the Met Council, shortly before the pandemic, put out a request for proposal to do intercept a survey of users of regional parks. I don't know if they did they even selected a vendor actually to do the survey, but I don't know if it was done or not. So I think it is right now is a good timing to check with Met Council. If nothing else, we can certainly learn from their experiences so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel or start from scratch. So that's my colleagues here really they are experts. They already shared generously their experiences and thoughts. So this is the 2 cents I would like to add.
Thank you. All right, anybody with some thoughts or questions or experiences, and yeah, feel free to use the chat as well. I'll kind of monitor that as well as we're going. So Ben, you got your mic off, you're ready to go.
Yeah, I'll just jump in here quick. So, and I'll do a little disclaimer is that the counters that we use within our system are called Traffics, and I'll put a web link in there so people, if they want to check it out. And we haven't looked into any other ones. 7 years ago, these fell into our laps and they seem to work well for our system, and that's why we've stayed with them. They seem to be, fairly cheap to get in. It's about $2,200 to start with 3 counters, and that includes the docking station that you go out there to collect the data, the cables, and then the online support with it. And these counters, they've been super helpful in our system because they're literally like 4 by 6. They're super small. We put them inside electrical boxes. We use them to count vehicles that are going in and out of our parks. So we're doing vehicle counts, and that's where our estimates on the number of people actually in there that are in the vehicles come into play in our system. But we have 11 of these in our system now. We had 3 for a long time and just purchased 8 more this last year. But like you said, it's really the trends that we're looking for and what we're seeing and trying to get that, is park usership going down? Is it going up? And then we can identify why or why not, and that type of thing. So I just encourage people, if they're interested in something that seems to be, at least within our system, very helpful and some pretty cheap, in my mind, to gather some data and some good data, because this product, it doesn't just, you spit out just single, it'll give you, daily counts, patterns, 24 hours, 7 days a week, 12 months, it'll give you, yearly summaries, yearly trends, things of that nature. So it's really been a helpful tool for us in our system. And then as it goes, I would just encourage everybody, if you have the opportunity, if you're selling like parking passes or things of that nature, or I don't know, even a concession stand or something, if you have the ability to build within your point of sale system some sort of questionnaire type thing, like I'll take, for example, here at Quarry Park, from Memorial Day to Labor Day, if people come through the gate and they're purchasing a pass from our gatekeeper, they get asked, what county are you coming from? And so this last year we had people visit from 80 out of the 87 counties in Minnesota. We also had 40 people visit from 45 states across the United States at Quarry Park. And then we were also we were able to extrapolate some more data out of that, where 50% of our visitors from Memorial Day to Labor Day actually come out of the 7-county metro area. And then we were actually to break that down even more. 50% of that 50% come out of just Hennepin County. So, it's great. And that's just from gathering one simple little piece of data, asking which county are you from. So you can get some pretty good things. I just encourage everybody to, if you can have that availability or that option, to ask the question.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, and I think that's a nice follow-up to Jeff's question there about the why. Sort of taking off my extension hat and putting on my county parks board hat, as you think about how do you want to expand usership or grow programming, having that information can be very helpful for understanding, when are our high peak usage, when maybe we need something happening on Saturday at 3 because the park's really quiet then, as well as marketing. Like we already know, like you said, you're getting people out of Hennepin County. Maybe you need to either market more, or maybe that's hey, but we're not getting anybody from the county to the north of us, so we should do some marketing up there. So I think there's a lot of, if you take time to be deliberate with the data and bring it to your groups, your parks boards, and kind of talk through there, you can find a lot of opportunities from that data as well.
I think the data can also help with your programming in your different areas too. If you do programming, it really can help you determine when might be the best time to do some of your programs. When are your high traffic areas? In general, you may already know that when your high traffic times are, but it can also help with some of the programming that you have going on. And I think depending on the information that you're getting from your counts, if you're getting more of that information, like Ben was talking about, it can really start expanding how you can use that to maybe promote to minority groups and new users in the park, and start to figure out who's there and who's not, and how do we get out and outreach to those particular people, and really start to get a more broad usership of the parks as well. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different opportunities, and Jeff, if we haven't really answered your question quite well enough, maybe you can pipe in. Otherwise, there may be someone else on here that has some information as well.
Just add to some of that. I guess for Jeff, I think that's not a stupid question at all. I think that's like one of the most important questions that kind of is there. One of the things that was on our mind when we started doing this work, 5 or 6 years ago, was, and this has kind of been mentioned, that we're like in an age of big data, right? And there seems to be data on everything, and everyone expects there to be data on everything. And one of the things we were realizing is that we didn't really have good data on the trails at that point. And so it's kind of just a way, to be giving what people, both public, the managers and legislators in particular, kind of what they expect, and just it kind of a way to say that, we're in this game too. And so one of the things that we've found that, a lot of these kind of key findings, so to speak, are things that you may like already know, kind of like what your high peak usage time is, or that weekends are more busy than weekdays, or things of this nature. And so when these are known from a variety of ways, and some of which are anecdotal, and oftentimes that works great. So one of the things that just kind of this objective systematic data can do is validate the things that we think we already know, and that's a really strong foundation that's necessary. But there's also ways in which some of the things that we think we know, we learn, we don't actually know that well, right? And so kind of one example of that is on these kind of long distance bike trails, the common perception is, and kind of has always been, that these are for bicycles, that, you build like a 20-mile trail, and, when you're out there, most people use zero on bicycles. And so this is like a bicycle facility. And so what the counts have shown is that it's definitely true. If you kind of sit on one spot of the trail and you watch people go by, it varies a bit, but 60 to 80% of the people you see at any given point are typically bicyclists. However, when you put kind of counters at numerous spots throughout the trail, and then you figure out kind of what average distances are for bicyclists and pedestrians, what we typically have found is that overall, that over the course of that 20 miles, that there's actually more unique pedestrian visits than unique bicyclist visits. And this is something that's a bit counterintuitive, but it's been a pretty standard finding we've seen across a number of systems. And so that's something that, kind of the anecdotal evidence wouldn't have really led us to. And finally, I'll just say, I think, especially when you start doing this over time and you have a program in place, it really puts you in good positions to, I think the COVID has been a perfect example of this. COVID hit, and, I started using trails more. I think most of us did. And we all recognize, there's a lot of people out here. And so without having done trail counts for the last 5 years, we wouldn't have been able to quantify kind of what that increase was. But since those programs have been in place, we've been able to say with a really high degree of confidence that, 40 to 50% increases. And so that's the type of information that we would not be able to say or report without these programs. I think there was something else in my mind, but it's left me, so I'll leave it there for now.
Is there any other members that have some questions, or maybe some unique situations that you're curious about how you might be able to do visitor counts in your area, or any experiences you might have? All right, well, we got about 5 minutes left, so we can certainly keep up with the chats or keep going on this. But I think I want to just, before we start hopping off, I want to thank our guests today for coming and giving us all the information. I think you gave us a lot to think about. So Andrew and Artie and Bridget, and am I going to say it right, Cindy?
Yes, she. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming today and helping us out. Maybe just one last question I think we could maybe ask is the best way to figure out the right way of doing counting. And is an RFP process kind of the best way to get started if you want to do some visitor counting in your park? Let's see how do you start? If you want to do visitor counts, where do you start?
Andrew, do you guys have a publication of some kind, like a how-to manual?
We don't. MnDOT has put out some kind of introductory manuals, which are great resources. I would say they might be a little intimidating if you first open them up. They're long and text heavy, but they're great, but they're just, be prepared. Just yeah, I guess a starting point, I would say a starting point would just be to, send me or Bridget or anyone, an email or a phone call and start the conversation. And depending on where that goes, I think an RFP is a very, it's a great place to kind of solicit kind of this work.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for coming on today. And like I said, this was recorded, so we're going to get this out onto the Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails website to be available to our members. And you know, if questions come out of this, please email Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails email as well, and we can continue to have more in-depth or kind of go off into different directions with future forums if needed. But again, I appreciate everybody that came on today, and I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon. Enjoy the weather and sunshine. Hopefully everyone else has sunshine too. Yes, I did do, well, not specifically for a nature play area. I'm looking at the chat here. We did all of our counts based on just our nature center itself, which is the same parking lot and same drive into the nature center. So we were doing counts as a nature center and playscape as a whole, that whole area, not necessarily just the playscape. Is a little bit harder in our playscape because they can enter from so many different sides of it. So there's not one access point there. But that is a situation where maybe we could do kind of that intercept style where we go out there for different times, and you know, if nothing else, we just count how many people are out in the playscape at that given time and kind of divide it over time. But we have not specifically done just the nature playscape. We typically do the whole nature center area. So good question, Mike. All righty. Thank you all for coming on. Thanks, Renee. Thanks, everybody else.
Yeah, thanks again.